And I have, the meeting is being recorded.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, Justin, take it away.
Great. Guess welcome everyone to the November meeting of the Environmental Advisory Board. Let's see. I assume the approval of the minutes from our last meeting is the first agenda item. Let me bring up the agenda.
Motion to approve the minutes.
Second that. So hearing no objections, great, we can move on. So I think
I'm so sorry, who made the motion?
Mike.
Mike, okay, and then seconded by Justin, thank you.
So I guess our first agenda is a brief discussion of the election results. I assume this is as related to Boulder, the city of Boulder.
Yeah, I just anticipated that we might have some sense of the important 2C2D ballot initiatives, which I think we do. I haven't seen the updated.
Yeah, I was just going to pull up the most updated. I haven't looked at the results since this morning. I assume that they're still on track to pass, or at least the franchise agreement is.
It's hanging on last time I looked, which wasn't that long ago.
Did the margins close significantly?
Let's see here.
I don't think they've changed.
Oh. I think so.
Unofficial election results. That's what I want. It'll make it easy to find.
It's way down.
So let's see. I guess as of 5:54. So
Okay.
it looks like they just updated it. It looks like, yeah, so 2C is currently up 53 to 46, and 2D is also up by about the same amount.
Yeah, like a point more.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's about what it's been trending. So what I wanted to say, given this, is that what we anticipate happening is that over the next 6 weeks or so, the city will be going through a kind of rapid planning process for how we're going to implement this coordination of a settlement agreement. There will almost certainly be a new staff unit created to coordinate the relatively significant amount of energy related work that was anticipated if the settlement agreement passed. And that includes a lot of very interesting things, from starting to move the undergrounding, which has been stalled since we had not signed our franchising agreement, to a lot of other related efforts, both distributed generation and resilience work and so on. So there will be some significant staffing decisions that will be made by the city over the next 2 months. This will probably result in distinct units, like the Climate Initiatives Department will now be, we anticipate it will be a distinct entity from the municipalization effort, which has been kind of blended together for the last, gosh, quite a while. So, so I think this is all potentially kind of exciting news in the sense that it will finally give us a kind of clear sense of how we're going to proceed and what our leadership structure is going to be and so on. So I guess anticipate hearing a lot more about that early in the coming year. So I guess that's mostly what I wanted to say. Is some things will happen because of this. We don't know exactly what they are. The time frame for your knowing of that is going to be early January, February, I think. We are, by the way, already trying to get on council's agenda for a discussion of our climate action plan. Our internal effort is to come up with a kind of interim new climate action strategy, if you will. We had, as you know, we had been trying to launch a much more robust community engagement process called the Climate Mobilization Action Plan. And because we have not been able to do as much community engagement for all the reasons you know, we've decided what we want to do is come up with kind of an interim plan. It's sort of almost like a 1 to 2 year guiding document to kind of give the community a sense of how we're going to be acting during this period of time that we're in the kind of COVID situation. So I'm sure that you'll be quite engaged by the discussions of how we're going to frame that document and that discussion for council. I think we're not likely to get in front of them until May. So we'll have plenty of time for discussion of that. So anyway, that was the reason I wanted to put that particular topic on the agenda, Justin.
Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate the update. And I guess, I don't know if folks have any questions for Brett, Susan?
Yeah, I have a question. Does that mean we're going to change the community's climate action goals? Because right now we say 100% renewable energy by 2030, and now we're only going to have 80%.
Yes, it does mean that we're going to be changing our goals, in part because our 80 by 2050 goal is actually now outdated to the state's own goal. And so there will be some updating of the goals. I think one of the questions that we haven't really resolved internally is how far can we go in that kind of a goal revision process without a sort of robust community engagement. And so I think it may be that we start framing up what we think those goals should be without proposing that they are those sort of final goals. But yes, I mean, there are other ways to get there, Susan, besides the muni. And I think that's part of what we'll be laying out.
Yeah, there are other ways to get there besides the muni, but if we're changing where there is, that's pretty significant. And I guess it does, to me, if we're in a climate emergency, but the next time we're going to talk to council about it is May, that doesn't really sound like an emergency to me.
Well, there are a lot of emergencies. And so we're trying to balance those. I mean, it's not as though we've stopped doing our work inside the department. And I think part of what we're trying to do also is survey what the best available options are. Because again, and I think this is something, I actually have now several times gone back to the memo that we wrote last July, because I think it is so formative to the discussions that we're having. Because one of the things that we said is it's no longer sufficient for us to simply set a goal for the community, because our achieving a goal within our community that doesn't translate and isn't scalable and replicable in other communities isn't necessarily that useful if our real objective is climate stabilization. So I think that what we're looking for is what is the city's role that contributes to changing systems globally. And I think that's a much bigger question than just how do we hit a certain emissions target within our own boundaries.
Brett, just a comment here on, not all renewable has the same beneficial consequence for the environment. And I know our board hasn't talked about it. It does require a little bit of getting into the weeds. There are certain renewables that have a better long-term effect on the environment, if you will, or less of an impact than others. Solar is problematic. We swap out one environmental crisis for another in the long term. If we went full solar, we would be having an earth crisis in terms of rare earth elements. And the degradation done on the landscape to find those elements and dig them out of the ground is almost as bad as digging out gold from mines. It really is an ugly process. And then they don't recycle very well. And wind is a superior source. Of course, hydro is the best, probably. So, in some, of course, there's, I see.
Yeah, hydro's got its own issues.
It has its own issues. And of course, there's always nuclear, it has its own issues. But we haven't talked about this. It's probably something that the board should have on the agenda. It's a homework assignment to be sure, but it's something we shouldn't just say, bringing emissions down from all manners of sources are all equal. They really aren't. And we need to be a little bit more aware of this.
Yeah, I think that would be an interesting and fruitful conversation to have. I think council is going to certainly, I think, be interested in hearing the perspectives from a variety of different sources on that as it starts to consider what our next approach should be. That's
something that a board, I think, should provide a opinion upon, if you will, a statement upon. I mean, it's only this board, I think, that would provide that kind of have that kind of dialogue and conversation.
Yeah, I think that's right. I don't think there is another board in the city that would be looking at the sort of life cycle analysis of carbon benefits from the different pathways that we might choose.
Yeah, it's an interesting conversation.
I think
Probably broader than the city.
Mhm.
and maybe Heidi, for our notes, that's a topic that we could build into the next conversation about our climate action plan to have with the EAB. And I'll have a better sense of when I think we want to try to schedule that by late this year. Again, this is all sort of wrapped up in all these different shifts that are going to happen because of the vote today. Or today? Yeah, I guess yesterday.
Okay, I guess there anything else to talk about? I guess it seems like it's mostly a stay tuned, which makes sense given that I'm sure the city's still trying to figure out their path forward here. All right, what is next? So I guess next would be following up on, I guess, Miriam and Brett's discussions with Boulder County and some other folks you've been talking to. So I know you sent something around, Miriam. Should we look at that, or is this more of just a discussion?
The thing I sent around was the thing that was mentioned in our last meeting, that I would provide a summary of a statement that we were going to provide to the city.
You're like cutting in and out a little.
So hold on.
It's much better.
You can hear me now? Okay. The document I sent was a document that I said that I would provide, that was a statement we were going to provide to the city about basically the presentation that was presented last time we met, and some thoughts that we had moving forward with that. And it actually isn't related to the conversation that Brett and I had with the county, but it's sort of related, I guess. I don't know.
Okay.
Brett, do
So
you want to talk
maybe I'm
about
just misinterpreting the agenda item. 2 months ago feels like a lifetime right now. Not
I
remembering
know.
all our takeaways. So thank you for taking the lead on that.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure we had a chance to follow up on what I think was a very productive process that Miriam has essentially initiated around all this. So I thought maybe, Miriam, we could just give folks a little bit of an update about the meeting that you and I sat in on. Maybe if you want to start, I could do a little follow-up from that.
Okay, sure. So we ended up having a couple of meetings with county. First, to kind of introduce the same presentation that you guys were given about our thoughts, or my thoughts, I guess, on the severity of the impacts associated with smoke, and how we believe that this needs to be dealt with for the city and the county. And after that initial meeting, we had a second meeting, and it was sort of around, funding mechanisms and that kind of thing. But the conversation actually turned toward, this is a great idea. Let's talk about dealing with this on a regional basis, and talking to other local cities, talking to Fort Collins about what they are doing and how we can, work with them, and as well some of the other municipalities as well. So yeah, it sounded like a good start of a conversation for the county to kind of get something going with everybody.
Yeah, just to provide a little context to this, I remember us starting to have a conversation with the county about air quality monitoring. This was 5 or 6 years ago. And I think it would be fair to say that they were pretty clearly protective of that being their space and their monitoring systems being the kind of gold standard that we shouldn't be confusing by potentially bringing in any of these kind of private sector, third party monitoring pieces, which could potentially mislead people because they weren't necessarily well calibrated. And so it really kind of squashed, in a sense, any real move to bring forward alternative data. So that's kind of where that was a number of years ago. And so I thought it was really productive. First of all, there's been a leadership change in that department at the county. Secondly, the technology systems have changed. Like this purple air piece, it's just out there. It's not like you could stop it from being out there. It's just already out there generating information. But I think that there's also, frankly, what I feel like I've seen, and if you didn't see this, I'd be really welcoming of your views, but I think that there was a real openness on the part of the county of saying, you know, you're right. So our systems are sort of arcane. The way we're languaging this stuff isn't accessible. It isn't the best. We've been really preoccupied with other things. We see that there's some deficiencies here. We do feel like there's a need to improve this, and sort of like, well, how do we go about doing this? And I think that that's in part where there was also this recognition that there's a whole bunch of new issues that have emerged, like the wildfire stuff that's now obviously going to be much more dramatic than people probably anticipated. That mean we've got to take kind of a bigger approach to this. So the next step is this, I think, going to be some kind of a gathering of regional air quality folks to talk through a lot of the kinds of issues that Miriam essentially raised. So I think that it is productive. My question to you, Miriam, is whether it's sort of like it a little bit kind of went back into the public sector's court, like, okay, you guys in all of your public jurisdictions get together and talk this through, and hopefully you'll get it better this time.
That's how it felt at the end of it. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And do you feel like there's anything that we should be trying to do, or any sort of framing or formatting for these next conversations that would enhance the likelihood that, you know, the kinds of issues that you raised will get addressed?
I mean, that's a hard question. I felt like county in particular is still very focused in one direction and how they want to approach monitoring, and the best use of their resources is obviously, in their opinion, going to universities. I think that there's a much larger world of information out there than they are currently accessing, and they could be brought to what my hope is that in their talking to some of the other cities and what they're doing, they will understand that there is a lot more out there that they could be doing, and more resources available to them.
Well, yes. So thank you. I think that makes a lot of sense that we do keep track of that. One follow-up that I wanted to share with you is that I got an email late Monday from Cindy Copeland from the county, and she said that they had met with the Fort Collins folks. So Miriam had also brought forward this EPA air quality and wildfires grant opportunity, and Fort Collins is, as we know, like, they're moving on all this stuff. And so they were already well down the road of putting together a consortium to pursue that EPA grant. But apparently in this conversation that was had, they're quite interested in having the county and possibly the city participate in that.
Great.
So I think that looks positive. And maybe, Miriam, one of the ways, I mean, you've been a real champion, to be honest, on this topic. And I hope you don't step back from your continuing to push us in that way, because I think it's been very productive. I think that this wildfire and air quality and climate change nexus is a really fruitful place for us to continue to assert the value of our participating.
Okay.
And so what that looks like, I don't quite know, but maybe what I'll do is I'll respond to Cindy and I'll copy you, and so that you can keep track of that and maybe look for the ways that we can continue to be involved in that discussion of how that emerges. Because clearly we know that the wildfire, air quality, climate change problem that we're going to face is going to not only continue to be there, but get worse.
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah, I'm happy to participate. I don't know how much I can. There's definitely a public sector line that I feel like I'm crossing.
well, yeah, except that now we're into this context of people pursuing grants. And this will not, hopefully shouldn't be the only opportunity for us to pursue resources to explore ways to respond to this issue, right? So I think that whether it's this opportunity or others, I think there's just so much work that needs to be done in this sector. So I guess mostly what I'm saying, and I really want to accentuate for this board, is this is a really good example of an EAB member flagging an issue that they have an expertise in and a concern about, bringing it forward, and I think really moving a broader conversation forward as a consequence. So first, thank you. And if you're interested, I'll keep making sure that you're looped into these discussions.
Sure. No, I'm super excited that the county is receptive and that something's happening. Yeah.
I wanted to, can I jump in for a sec, guys?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was, I meant to send you this last week, but there was recently a National Academy of Sciences symposium / workshop on wildland fires and air quality, and with a lot of expert speakers in Colorado. And they've recorded all the talks and workshop sessions, and they're available. So I bookmarked it, and the agenda is really cool. I think you guys will like it. So I'll just email that to everyone. But I think I checked out some of the sessions and they're really good. So I think
great. Thank you.
That's great.
Yeah. And the other thing I was thinking about a lot during this fire thing too is, like the availability of the information for like citizens, I'm thinking about like looking for the websites. We looked at some of them and like, it's kind of hard to dive into our website, but like, since, I don't know if anyone else has noticed that like, since the last version of iOS, like the air AQI is right there under the weather on your phone app for Boulder. And so it's like,
is it? I didn't know that.
It's on there now. So like throughout that whole season, I was like, I don't even know if there was a website anymore if I'd ever go to it, because it's like right on my phone in the Apple Weather app now. If you just scroll down below,
right,
it's like right there.
Right.
Yeah, right at the bottom of the. Yeah. So I was thinking about that. Like, so how much time would we want to, as a city, invest into like a fancy website if everyone's gonna have it on their phone? I don't know. This is a thought I had. So I'm not sure I'd ever go to it.
We should encourage everyone in Boulder to get an iPhone 12.
Well, not iPhone 12. It's just any iPhone or any. It's on any iPhone or any Android. It's just like in the weather apps you can download now. So,
one thing that struck me in our experience, personally, I mean, and I'm sure this was true for many other people, certain friends of mine, the way they kept on top of the fires that were occurring was visuals. This would be cameras that were often people taking photos, or on your iPhones taking videos. We had some photos from people who were flying in that were taking their helicopter. I mean, the visual aspect, not a quantification now of PM 2.5 or anything like that, but just being able to see, and I've been working a little bit here while we've been talking on Miriam's document. I call it eye in the sky. And that is, having a simple camera system that is sitting on the highest buildings in Boulder, looking west to the foothills, north and south, so that a resident can see the visibility and appreciate the layer of, from their own subjective view, oh yeah, it's pretty hazy. And they can maybe see a plume, or they can see, even at night, you can see red flares if there's a fire. So it's sort of like the old school thing of, why did we used to have forts in the forest as observation sites, the Forest Service, to be able to observe and warn of a fire in the distance. A simple camera monitoring system that sits in Boulder looking west a westward view eye in the sky would actually be a pretty reasonable thing to have up that's easily accessible and easily understood by any person. It doesn't involve science in any particular way. It's a visibility monitoring system.
Yeah, there's actually a group in California that's associated with Argonne National Lab and some of the universities in California that's establishing a network like that. But they've also implemented edge computing on the cameras that will actually seek out and like machine learn and find fires without human interaction and look for plumes and just like
Wow.
send automated alerts. Pretty cool. Yeah.
I think that this is a really interesting discussion, and maybe one that we should think about returning to, because my invitation to all of you is to think about where are the gaps that we're not either recognizing or addressing in either information or knowledge. And so maybe this is where we could leave it for now, but I do want to come back to this because each of you has, you were selected for the EAB because you bring real expertise from various different vantages, and that several of you are either in professional societies or academic and research societies. So, because I think that's one of the services that you could provide to the city is to say, okay, we've now, like Miriam, you've essentially initiated an engagement with this part of the public infrastructure that's supposed to be responsible for this piece. And in that engagement, we're going to see both how it responds and where both it sees or we see issues or gaps in that system that need to be addressed, especially if we think not just about today, but we think about, based of course, a lot on what you guys know about what's coming, where it's going to be. So maybe we'll plan to put this topic back on the agenda in January and have a conversation about like where next in this. And so,
Well, and I think it might, I think it's also good to remember it for a later conversation on our letter to council. I mean, I think this is an issue that
yes,
is worth highlighting in that.
yeah. Thank you, Justin. And maybe this will be my last statement about this because of what you just said, that Marty, you actually on the other side of this were among the first to really say, look, we have to be thinking about air quality in the context of climate change and how that's going to be changing. And I think that you and several others on this board might have unique access to some of the climate modeling that would give us some insights about that. Because it's one thing to just say, yeah, it's probably going to get worse. And it's another thing to say, well, actually, the climate science models are saying this about what's likely to happen. Like I remember vividly when we did the climate action planning process in 2014-15, that the National Academy of Sciences study came out and it had a map of this region and it showed that the likelihood of wildfire was supposed to increase by 600% in the zone that we were in. People were like, oh, that must be an error. That couldn't possibly be. Well, here we are. That science was probably pretty dead on. Okay, so I'll let that one go, but thank you. And Miriam, again, thanks for your leadership on this issue.
And I just tossed those links I meant, the link to the symposium and the HPREN into the chat for everyone. I can email them around later too.
That's great. And
Thanks.
Heidi, can we make sure we capture those links into the notes? Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
thanks so much, Miriam. This is exciting and very timely.
Yeah.
All right, I guess move on to the, cities or counties, or no. So these are proposals from the city to Boulder County for funding, correct, Brett?
Yes.
And I know we've had similar things before us before. So maybe I'll pass it to you. Tell us what you're looking for, and it might be helpful if you could briefly walk through the two proposals.
Yes. So for quite a long time, at least as long as I've been at the city, the county has had essentially been a small grants program to the various jurisdictions in the county on an annual basis, essentially sustainability funding, which I think in years past, the total giving that the total amount that a city could access was in the neighborhood of $25,000 to $35,000 total. But then with the passage of the county's sustainability tax, the level of resources that the county now has to disperse are significantly larger. And so, so too are the expectations of documentation and so on that come along with applying for those dollars. So we are in that cycle of applying for those resources. Last year was the first year that we could apply for a larger amount. I can't remember last year's total, but I think it was in the neighborhood of $120,000 to $130,000. And so we're applying for a comparable amount this year. It's a little less because of the economic hits that people have been taking. But in any event, one of the new criteria that are in the county's specifications for these grants are that if the jurisdiction has some kind of environmental or sustainability committee, that the staff should have gotten some essentially approval or endorsement from that entity for the ideas that are being proposed. So just to give you a sense of the internal process that the city, the department went through, we went through essentially almost like an internal competitive grants process internally, in which people presented ideas. So this is essentially funding that's available above and beyond what our budgets normally are. And so two projects that were proposed were selected internally to be submitted for this Boulder County Sustainability Grant. So the first one is a project that the Zero Waste team has been thinking about for some time and working on. That is one aspect of this was the support for a kind of reusable, essentially coffee cup mug. This is the vessel unit that you might have seen if you've been to the cafe at the library. But the idea is that that system of reducing the amount, well, essentially what happens for a coffee house that takes on this system is that they make a surcharge on anybody who buys a drink and is getting a disposable cup. And so there is an incentive to use this kind of reusable cup, but it requires a kind of whole collection and cleaning and distribution system. And getting the kind of economies of scale to start making that self-sufficient usually requires some kind of an initial, often grant-funded investment. So our Zero Waste team has proposed that part of this money would be used to work with that company Vessel to essentially catalyze the significant scale up of that offering here locally. And then the second part of that proposal is about supporting the restaurant industry here locally to use compostable wares in their takeout, since of course so much more of the restaurant industry is now using takeout as their means of distributing food. And so that's the first project that's being proposed. So before I mention the other one, any questions about that one? Susan?
I have a question. First of all, the coffee shop I go to, and I think all coffee shops right now in a COVID world, you can't even bring your own cup. You can only get disposable cups. So does this program even work in a COVID world?
Yeah, I think it's really intended to be, how do we lay the groundwork for this kind of moving out once we start to get past that time frame. So it already had a probably 6 to 12 month development lead time anyway, which is hopefully about the period of time that we're going to still be in this kind of physical distancing context. So
okay. And then my second question is also based on personal experience, and that is my coffee shop uses compostable cups, as do the other restaurants in the plaza, but there are no compost bins outside. So you have to go back in the shop. Nobody's going to wait in line and go back in the shop and use their compost bin inside. So it seems from a zero waste perspective, in this current state we're in, having some kind of program where we increase the availability of recycling and compost bins in public places is super important.
Those are both really useful feedback, Susan. As my note-taking skills are a little limited tonight, Heidi, I hope you're capturing those because I really do want to forward those into our zero waste team. So very helpful comments. Thank you, Susan.
I've got it
Others?
written down here if Heidi missed it.
Oh,
too.
good. Thank you.
I just realized I haven't bought a coffee at a coffee shop since February.
Yeah, just thinking the same thing. I was like, coffee shop.
It's been so long.
I guess I feel like I went out for
Like one
bagels once.
luxury.
No, I mean, I think the second point you make, Susan, is one that I always think of as the city moves to zero waste, where, you know, yeah, we've gotten takeout a few times on Pearl Street, and then the compost is like overflowing and filled with garbage. And
Yeah.
what do you do with these compostable containers? I guess you
Well,
bring, you bring them home if you live in Boulder, but if you don't have that luxury.
So for you to know, we rely a lot on self-reporting from our residents about these issues of where we don't have sufficient collection points. So in addition to our forwarding this to the team directly, Susan, I just would say, please send us information about those kinds of places where you see this as an issue, because that's.
Where do I send that?
Well, that's a very good question. You can send it directly to me, but I will find out who, we have a zero, Heidi, I think it probably is Ellen, don't you think? So I'll find out that point that.
Yeah, I'm looking, I'm sure there's I think there's an actual email address. I'm looking that up online and I'll post if I find it.
Yeah.
I have a somewhat,
Send it to you on my particular place, but it seems pretty endemic, like throughout.
Yeah, the Table Mesa Shopping Plaza certainly shares that, though there's a few now since they remodeled it.
Brett, I had a related question in that I got an email from just a citizen today with a complaint. And I tried to get onto the city's website to find where he could submit a complaint, and it was not clear to me. So if you could help me figure that out, that would be great.
Yeah, Be Heard Boulder is typically the place that we've
Is
tried
it? Okay.
to direct that kind of direct feedback, and it was designed to be a place that we would see that sort of stuff.
Be Heard Boulder?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is it like HERD to be crafty with the buffs or something? Or is it?
Okay,
I'm not-
I mean, it was an emission source that he was concerned about, and I did direct it.
Oh.
I said, well, you could talk to CDPHE about permitting, but I don't know who else you would tell.
Was his name Scott?
Sorry.
I'm wondering, because we just fielded sounds like,
No, it was Steve Borstein.
oh, no, I think it had to do with Jack's fish house, I think, down on Pearl.
I don't know. He
Okay.
wouldn't tell. He didn't say where.
But you might forward that to me. I think I think he actually contacted us directly and we connected him.
Okay.
So Susan, zerowaste@bouldercolorado.gov.
Okay, thanks.
But again, really good questions. Others or other comments from anyone on this particular aspect? Okay.
So, I mean, I guess it seems like the city, just so I'm clear, the city is envisioning recruiting some number of stores in like a pilot with this model?
The pilot stage for the vessel piece has already essentially rolled out, and this is really about taking it to scale.
Okay.
So it's how to make it the economics attractive so a whole bunch more places sign on.
Can I put forth just one other idea, or at least suggestion related to that? When there are big festivals down in Lyons at the Planet Bluegrass, they always have like student volunteers that are there helping direct people to where to put their garbage and where to put their compost. And it's very, I mean, they keep it very clean and separated that way. I mean, I'm sure the city of Boulder doesn't have the resources to have students at their trash cans all the time, but I don't know, there may be a lower level of potentially, you know, having student interns or something, you know, go to places to help people identify where they need to be putting stuff. I don't know.
We actually do deploy volunteers like that at major events and at the farmers market.
Okay.
It's
Yeah.
the challenge is the type of situations you guys are describing, which is the sort of day in, day out usage where
Right.
you can't have people stationed there. But yeah. Okay, and so just a reminder of the kind of end game to this piece of the discussion. So what staff hopes from the EAB tonight is that at the end of this, and hopefully if we've sufficiently answered your questions, that you will draft or speak an endorsement that you can sort of vote on so that there'll be some record in your minutes that we can attach to the grant. So just so you know where we're trying to go with this. So the second project is one that I'm leading through the ecosystem side of the work. And it's got essentially three parts. The first is that we're participating in an effort that is involving a variety of cities in the Urban Sustainability Directors Network to develop what is essentially a carbon management approach. So this is a bit of a shift in the paradigm from carbon's a problem, we just need to get it out of the atmosphere and then who kind of cares where it goes, or stop putting it there, to carbon's a resource. And if we can capture it and direct it, especially into living systems in a strategic way, it can deliver a whole bunch of important services that we need. So if we can capture carbon and direct it rapidly into urban forests, it can provide shade that we're going to need for cooling. If we can direct it into soils in certain ways, we can increase the water holding capacity and stormwater management capacities. We can use it to denature certain urban toxics. We can use it to increase the nutrient density of food. We can increase it to use it to increase agricultural productivities. So this is kind of a new field of carbon management, and that we're really now on the cusp of a whole new planning system for how we manage carbon. And that means both how do we literally design these kinds of plans? What are you literally planning around? And then tools that enable you to project how much carbon you can take from this and put to that, and then the values you get. So the first part of this project is building on some work that we've been doing with the Urban Sustainability Directors Network and building out a carbon management tool for Boulder for a number of our sort of natural assets, namely urban forests, parks, and sort of turf lands, and our agricultural side. So this is work we've been doing with the Trust for Public Land. They've built a prototype of these tools for 3 Midwestern cities, Lincoln, Columbia, Missouri, and Iowa City, Iowa. And then we're going to be a part of a next cohort that includes San Francisco, San Luis Obispo, Fayetteville, Arkansas, and Cleveland. And so this will be funding that helps build that sort of carbon management tool. So the second aspect of that, which is actually a brand new piece that we're really leading nationally, is to develop the ecosystem services valuations that can help us really quantify what that carbon that we've captured and directed into those systems can produce, and how to literally both measure it and quantify it, both as carbon, but also the economic and other social benefits that come from that. And that's work that we're going to be doing with a really cool lab at CU run by Laura D, and a doctoral student that she's got there named Megan Daly. And we're going to be using tools that were developed in Stanford. It's out of their natural capital program. And it's a tool called Invest, which is an ecosystem services valuation tool designed for urban context. So Mike and others, you might be familiar with this ecosystem services valuation, often more in the sort of larger landscapes context. This is an effort to try to bring that into the urban context, partly because what we're trying to really quantify is that sort of on a ton for ton basis, yes, we can't capture as much carbon in an urban landscape as we might in a large sort of agricultural or rangeland or forest context, but we might be able to deliver, not only in terms of that carbon, but all the things that it can do for us, a net amount of value that might be greater than a lot of other contexts of carbon sequestration. So that's the second piece, is building out that ecosystem services modeling tool. And then the third piece, sort of related to this implementation of this, is that in Boulder right now, the management of urban forests is basically a liability. Every amount of money that we spend for that, and all of the byproducts in terms of the wood that's produced from doing the thinnings and maintenance and stuff, is a liability. And in fact, we spend somewhere between $70,000 to $100,000 a year shipping wood chips out of the community because they're essentially of no value. So we're actually exploring how we could start capturing that biomass, use it in a context of bioenergy and biochar. That biochar then becomes a resource for a whole bunch of other really interesting things, including more carbon sequestration. And that what we're really looking towards is the future in which we might actually be able to manage our urban forests in part for that resource, so that we can reduce the cost of maintenance for our urban forests. Because that's one of the things that urban foresters always lament, is that maybe you can get money to plant a tree, but you can't get any money to maintain that forest. And that's one of the reasons why our urban forests are in such terrible shape. So anyway, those are the three elements that are in this sort of second aspect that we're asking for county money for. Questions or comments in that area?
I was gonna say, Brett, I'm gonna toss another link in here to a paper, a commentary in Nature that I contributed to like a year ago on aligning. It's largely about agriculture, but it's short, but it's high level, and it talks about very much these things about thinking about carbon as sort of a resource and a carbon economy in that, from that context. So I think it might be useful to you guys.
Fantastic.
Yeah, but it touches on a lot of the things you just touched on.
That's
idea
awesome, Mike. I'd love to see that.
Brenner, when I was reading this, I really was thinking of a recent snowstorm and what it did to the urban forest. And wondering, because we still have in our neighborhood, and you probably all see this too in your area, a lot of wood piles waiting to be taken care of. Maybe it's Taddock and Tree Company, or I don't know who's going to come through, and who the city's commissioned to actually take this wood out of our streets and so forth. I imagine we lost a sizable fraction, an unusual large fraction of our canopy in September. Yeah. And I just wonder how this proposal, if at all, relates to the dilemma that we have about getting rid of this wood that's come off of our trees in the snowstorms.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm actually talking to Taddock about the possibility of their being interested in hosting this bioenergy, biochar technology that could start converting this material into useful co-products.
Nice.
Yeah. In fact, I was just talking to our urban forester last week, and it was really funny because we were having this Zoom call, and I suddenly realized that one of the parks employees was up on the scissor lift at the parks yard where they were receiving all that material. Like, so they have to be up so high to be able to see the trucks coming in because that pile is just so enormous now. Yeah. So yes, absolutely. I mean, it's terrifying. We're working with, like I said, Iowa City, Iowa on this other project. And in Sioux City, when that derecho event went through, it took out 50% of their urban forest.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do you know what roughly we live in an area that has these snowstorms from time to time, and they do trim out our canopy. And we also have windstorms, and they also do some of that. What is the cycle rate of loss and then regrowth of our urban forest canopy? Do you know what those numbers are? The time scale for, let's just throw out a number. Let's say that we lost 5% of the urban forest here in the snowstorm. How long will it, if that were a right number, I'm not saying it is or isn't, but how long would it take to return 5% into the urban forest itself?
Well, this is exactly the kind of questions that we're trying to lay the groundwork to be able to answer, Marty, with that baseline assessment. So exactly, you're right on the track of what we're trying to think about. And we haven't had that information. And by the way, so there's going to be a really interesting intersection between EAB and the Parks and Recreation Board sometime in the near future, when we start to then talk about, okay, now how do we manage not just for the city's urban forests, which is the right of ways and the parks, but all of the private lands, because ultimately, of course, we have to try to encourage a sort of new management approach across all of those lands. And what are the techniques and tools that we're going to have available to do that? Is it codes and ordinances? Is it unique kinds of easements around trees in certain parts of people's yards? You know, there's going to have to be a whole bunch of creative thinking that goes on there.
One other thought to add, just real quick. We had talked in a meeting, maybe it's 3 meetings ago, about the importance of the urban canopy as a cooling effect, a shading effect, to help mitigate some of the effects of warming temperatures. And of course, a great example of that has been on the Pearl Street Mall that took down some of their nice shady trees about 3 years ago, and they planted these small little fellas that I hope in my lifetime I'll get to sit underneath and get shade again. But we felt the immediate temperature effect of the lost canopy. So do you have a place in here where you tie in a little bit with the urban heat island concern and the urban forest?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, because I meant to say this before, Miriam, around your topic area. It's when I was saying about asking you to start thinking about where the gaps are. It's taken me about 5 years, but I feel like I'm now finally starting to get some relationships at the university where I can get researchers to start really digging in on some of these questions that we need to answer. This urban heat island piece is the piece that I have not yet found the right hooks yet, but I think we're getting close. And I think that if the EAB could help us identify those kind of critical research questions that we need to really address and get that, you know, this is where, you know, Mike, folks like you and others who are researchers in this kind of system, like effectively framing that in the sort of format and science language of science, so that it's really clear, so that we can then work with those researchers to go find that funding so that we can get these questions answered. So that's a long way of saying, Marty, no, not yet, but I think we're getting close to being able to find those folks who would be interested in helping us with that. Susan?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, I'm not sure this is the right time or when we're talking about urban heat islands, but I think one of the connectors I would like to see is a connection between us and our planning department. In particular, I've been doing some research on a style of planning and building called biophilic design. Are you all familiar with biophilic design?
No.
Biophilic, basically in concert with biology and using principles that sequester carbon. A good example would be the green walls that they're building as bus stops in London, where, you know, I think their 10-foot square green wall is something like the same as planting 750 trees. And when I see that giant heat island on 30th Street of apartment buildings, I think, oh my God, you know, if those were biophilic organisms in addition to apartment buildings, we would be solving the heat island issue. We would be creating carbon sequestration, and that could be really measurable. So I'll send you a couple of links on it, but I think it's something for the future. Again, EIB partnering with our planning department to say, hey, we got to change the way we do design to be more symbiotic with nature and biology and not in conflict.
Interesting, Susan. It reminds me of Wrigley Field's outfield wall, right, which is covered with these beautiful vines. Would that be an example of that type of?
You know, that would be an example of very traditional, right? Like we did that for a long time, but if you think even like every underpass in Boulder could have moss walls instead of concrete covered walls and would be generative.
Yeah, cool.
I actually know a couple of landscape designers that specialize in that kind of work.
Awesome.
Yeah, they're out there certainly, and they're doing a lot of really interesting things.
Well, and one thing to keep in mind is that we have a new planning director that starts middle of this month. So this is kind of an interesting time. And I think, Susan and others, you would probably agree that Boulder has a long legacy of trying to think about sort of environmentally oriented ways of living. And so that's sort of, it's alignment with the legacy that we have in a certain sense. It's an evolution in that, if you will.
Yeah.
So I think to conclude then around this topic, if you all are amenable, then it would be helpful if you might consider, voicing a resolution saying that, you as EAB, you are in support of the staff submitting these proposals to the Boco County Sustainability Grant Program.
Okay, yeah, I guess I was just going to say on the idea, I mean, I think the first two elements you laid out are really interesting. I don't know, I'm always a little skeptical of ecosystem services and trying to quantify them. It's just like, it's hard to quantify, and then it's hard to figure out how you then monetize any of those things. And I don't know, it often feels like an academic exercise to me. So, I think it's raising a lot of other interesting questions, and especially how you could use the biomass to sort of biochar and seed, and increasing carbon in our soil seems like a great idea.
I think in a capitalistic society, unless you try to put a dollar value on things, it doesn't happen.
Yeah, no one's cracked that nut though. People have been trying to do this for so long, and I don't feel like anyone's doing it well in the country, or actually, at least I don't know. It's not something I've followed in a long time, but
Well, I
it
guess
seems like nobody's been able to crack that nut, which means it's probably not crackable.
I mean, I guess I think of it too. That's a good point. And I was thinking of it from the point of like, if you're trying to quantify them to say an absolute value, like here's what this plan is worth, that's really difficult. But it might be, if you're thinking about using them internally to the city to quantify some baseline plan and then see which direction you shift in relative to that plan as you tweak things, then maybe it's more useful. I don't know. That was one of the thoughts I had. So I'm curious what the vision for sort of how those would be used. Do you know what I'm getting at, Justin?
Yeah, I see your point. More of a planning tool than as a trying to
If you're like
monetize those benefits in some way.
do X, we can assign some value. Maybe the value is way off, but at least we'll know if we make this plan, if that value is going up or down. At least we'll have it. Maybe, I don't know if that's just something that came into my mind, but I don't know what the intent is. So I guess I'm asking a question too.
Kind of both and. One way of thinking about it is it's sort of decision support tool. Like if I had a choice of doing things that capture carbon, and I could differentiate between, and that one does a whole bunch of other things too, I would probably choose that one as opposed to if they were sort of relatively comparable. So it helps me make that relative choice. But that there are actually some emerging monetizing elements that are coming forward. So we're going to be probably working with this new entity called City Forest Credits that has created a market recognized offset product for urban forests that is a bundle of not only the carbon value, but 3 ecosystem services, energy use reduction, air quality improvement, and water infiltration. And they get more money for those offsets because of those additional ecosystem services values than just the carbon alone.
Okay.
It's interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's part of some of the gold standard and some of the other carbon protocols. So I guess it's worth good luck. So does anyone else have any questions, or should we, seems like the thing to do if we don't is to sort of vote on if we could support this.
Quick one, and this is kind of to your question too, Justin, and that is, I'll come back to all of the carbon laying on the ground right now that we're going to figure out what to do with here shortly. Get it off the streets. Now, we could turn it into wood chips and put it back into mulch and so forth. We probably have more than what we could use, but I don't know. And so there's probably some benefit. There's some, if you will, ecosystem service that could be quantified from that. Another one is take it all and throw it into a big furnace and use it for energy production, right? It was a big Vermont casting stove, if you will. And there's a ecosystem service cost related to that you're creating electricity by so doing. I know this is an academic question of sorts, but I'm just wondering, given this exercise that we have naturally happening in front of us, what would be the two options if we use those two? One, make it into mulch and put it onto our parks and neighborhoods and let people use that. What's the ecosystem value of that? Versus what if we turn it into an energy source? What would be the cost and benefit of that?
I think just so to avoid us going too far into the weeds.
Yeah,
here,
I don't want to.
No, but that is exactly the kind of questions that we're trying to set ourselves up to be able to answer in the future.
Okay, great.
My wife and I argue about it all the time because she wants to leave all the leaves in our yard to decompose over the winter, and I would rather rake them up so they don't blow all over the place and kill all what little grass we have left.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
By the way, Heidi clarified that we don't need a resolution, but a motion, a simple motion would be sufficient.
Okay. Are we? Does anyone have any other questions for Brett? Then I guess I would make a motion to support these two grant proposals from the city.
I second that motion.
I.
All right. I
I,
don't know if you need more than a second or if we're good.
Thank
Great.
you.
So it seems like with that, we've got 50 minutes left. And two more big things on the agenda. One is sort of trying to wrap up the retreat, sort of prioritizing areas, and then the annual letter to city council. I want to make sure we have enough time for the letter because that's our actual takeaway. But I think the prioritization exercise can sort of lead into that a little, just because. So I mean, I looked briefly on the instructions for the letter to council, and it's basically you want to know what we liked, or what was good from the council's perspective this year, what was bad, and what are we looking forward to next year. And then they're looking for one of us to present sort of for a couple minutes on this at a council meeting in January, but figure we could get more into that at our December meeting. But it seems like we need to at least figure out, be great if we can come up with like a high level outline today so that we can work on it and finalize it at our October meeting, because it's due not long. I mean, our December meeting, because it's due not long.
Yeah, Brent, I think I remember from last year, what we did was we identified which topics were our priorities, and then each of us took a section to write up something on that topic, on one of the topics.
That's right. And we will create a Google Doc. We've determined that this is a way that the board can work between meetings in a publicly transparent way. So we'll create a Google Doc that you can all have access to. But yes, as Miriam said, we found in the past the most efficient way is for somebody to take a lead on drafting a section. Whether there are 5 sections or 3, and several of the sections have 2 people working on it. What have you.
Yeah, so it seems like it's due by the 18th of October. So it seems like it would be nice to have a draft for us to talk about at our, December meeting, so that we could then, finalize it in those weeks after if we need more time.
Justin, quick question, Justin. This letter we have from last year's submission, what was our feedback? What did we hear from council? What was their response? Was there a response? If we submitted exactly the same, would we have any different outcome? I mean, I'm all for, rethinking and adding new ideas, and that's great. But I also would like to know that it actually gets read and gets some rise out of council.
Yeah, I mean, my memory of the feedback we got from council was, okay, great, go for it. So
I think we got more than that. I think we got some specific comment. At least I remember there's being some specific comments on the air quality portion, and that may have been from Lisa Morzell. And then I think Bob Yates actually submitted a comment specifically on a couple of the things that we mentioned. But but it wasn't an overall, I mean, there was an overall sense of, yes, go ahead with whatever you think is good, but we did get some input from city
Okay,
council.
thanks for that. I don't remember.
We have a record. It'd be nice to have a record of those comments if they are written.
I think they are in our notes from, yeah,
Maybe from
it would be
February
from
or
meeting
March.
notes. Yeah.
But, you know, I mean, I think it's always a question with these letters. It's our opportunity to talk to council, and I think, you know, it's a big responsibility of our board. But yeah, at the same time, I agree with you. I mean, I think to the extent we can make it, as I've been on it, I think we keep trying to make them shorter and shorter, and that's something I support. I mean, to the extent that we can get it on a couple of pages, it is more likely to be read by council and considered than if, I mean, we've had some quite lengthy ones in the years I've been on the board.
Yeah, I would just note that the council, I think, specifically recognized the importance of the air quality issue, and it sort of illustrates the extent to which EAB was prescient about one of the key issues that was going to emerge, and certainly did this year. And then I think it's actually been quite influential to the council that the EAB has been vocal about soil. That came up quite significantly during the prairie dog discussions, and that quite a number of city council members were much more attuned to that issue, I think in part because EAB had been raising that issue. So I don't think you should underestimate the extent to which you're actually having some influence.
You know, just a quick comment. I don't know, Justin, if you're opening up for discussion in terms of any thoughts on what might be line items for this new letter. I would only just suggest real quick here. We had improve air quality as the 5th item. If we did nothing else, moving that to the 1st item, I would be very happy to see it elevated so to be read right up front, because I think we've been talking a lot about it. Miriam has, you know, the Google Doc that has some interesting ideas for smoke and air quality management issues that can already feed into, you know, we've got momentum, and I'd like to see that elevated from number 5 to number 1.
It might be nice to, I mean, I feel like we kind of, it weakens us a bit to sort of just try to introduce new things just for the sake of introduce. It might just be nice to, you know, reinforce our position and even trim it a little bit and concisely say, like, we still view these as pressing issues, and maybe reorder the way we talk about them and say, like, we've made some progress, or we're excited about this progress, and really concisely say, but these are still our issues, and we see them as still the thing to do.
I agree 100%. I think the air quality is a place we've talked a fair amount. There's momentum and there's experience, what we just experienced in the city. So, you know, ride that tiger.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my suggestion would be get rid of the rest of them, or maybe keep, I mean, we haven't talked at all about number 1, number 3, number 4, maybe.
I think 4 is related to what Brett has been doing with the.
I guess I see that more as number 6, but maybe, I don't know. So, I mean, I think some of them are sort of pie in the sky, and, you know, there'd be great things for the city to do, but it seems unlikely. And if we think there are things that are more important, I guess my suggestion would be to drop the others, focus on the.
2 is kind of nice, since it does tie into one of the proposals that Brett's putting forward here.
I mean, I think 2 is, that's something we have been pushing as a board earlier in the year, and, you know, with COVID, it sort of got lost, I would say. I mean, and, you know, maybe that ties back to, if we want to look at the, you know, there's this priorities map, the last page of the packet, which is sort of prioritizing these things, where was an exercise that is on our agenda. I don't know if folks think it would be valuable, or it's worth more just talking about it. But, you know, I think in general, a lot of these things, as they're grouped, really fit into the buckets we laid out last year.
Yeah.
Except for, you know, I personally think stormwater is very important, but probably not quite at the level of some of these other things. It's in the other issues box.
So a couple of thoughts. One is, I think that, again, it's especially unique and significant that this board has been talking about the intersection of air quality and climate change. I think urban heat is sort of in that bucket too. But I would like to suggest that you might want to bring the climate piece in connection to the air quality at least.
Yep.
And then I think on number 6, whatever it is, the soil. Yeah, I think, again, soil conservation and sequestration or something that again makes that link to the role of living systems in climate stabilization and resilience too.
And I think we can bring in, I mean, I'm looking at this priorities thing that we put together. I mean, all of these things are things that we brought up before, but I think we can address again. Even the climate emergency response can go in with air quality and urban heat island and soil sequestration.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the question, I mean, and then I guess there's a big hanging question out there, which is we sort of have stayed away from the energy piece as a board for the last few years, figuring that didn't seem like we really had a role in the municipalization process, and that was sort of going on as it went on. But I guess there may now be an opportunity for the board to, seems like as the city is rethinking its or reorganizing its position and the relationship with its municipalization as a process is going away, and now it's thinking about the relationship with Excel. Maybe there is more of a role for the board in the next year than there has been over the past few.
Yeah, I would say specifically in light of carbon management, since the way we produce and source electricity generates what I think now 44% of our greenhouse gas overload, and our transportation system, we want it to be more electrified. Well, that's just going to increase that load in a different way. So to me, being very active and vocal with the city and some of these partnership arrangements with Excel in terms of what kinds of projects that Excel might do with us. Because if you've read the partnership agreement, which I have, it's all very loosey-goosey. There's no dates, there's no priorities, there's no amounts of money. And seems like the Environmental Advisory Board ought to be part of the discussions with Excel and advising along with staff, city council on what projects could have the biggest impact.
Yeah, I mean, I think from the project piece, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to, my memory is that there's another board that's set up within the franchise agreement that is supposed to have input on there. So I guess I agree with you that I think there needs to be some role for the EAB, and
it's 2 Excel executives and a city council member and a staff person are supposed to get together on a quarterly basis. That's
okay. I thought there was also a public board, another public board created in there as well. It's my memory.
I don't recall that. I could be wrong.
I haven't read the franchise agreement in a few months now.
Well, I think there's nothing wrong with, well, I think the comments about not having such a long list that it drowns out the things you really want to emphasize. I think Miriam made the point that we're sort of really close in terms of what the last letter said, maybe dropping out a few of those issues, and then what you came up with in the retreat.
Yeah, I mean, I think except for there's a couple things that didn't seem to rise to the top, and yeah, I guess my suggestion would be to add something related to energy and climate, which sounds like Susan at least supports, because I do think, it seems like there's an opportunity now for potentially for the board to take a more active role than we have. It's just something that I know we decided to shelve a few years ago, but
I agree. I think that would be a good thing to include. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Just to throw out a few numbers here. This is, since we're talking energy and ultimately we're talking CO2 concentration, and we want to improve on that trend. It's interesting, we've now almost been a year in COVID, and economies, kind of cut back. Air transportation in particular, so there's a lot less fuel being used to move people in airplanes. Yet, when you look at the Mauna Loa site and you take the monthly mean Mauna Loa observatory value for CO2 for September of 2020, it was 411.3 parts per million, which was an increase of 3 parts per million from the year before. And if you look at the year before that, it was about the same. You cannot notice COVID in the Mauna Loa time series. That's what I'm trying to say. And that's stunning to me.
Yeah.
Because when you
Why
think
is
about
that?
it, pardon me?
Why do you think that is?
I don't know. You know, some of this, there's noisiness to the time series, so I don't want to just key on 1 month. Maybe we'll see a signal when we average over a whole year. And so I don't want to push it too hard. But I would have thought, because it's quite an experiment that we've put into society. We've shut ourselves down to a certain degree, more so than we could have done by policy, consciously imagining what we're doing is to reduce our carbon emissions. We were forced to do this because of a virus. And yet the CO2 increase in the atmosphere is unabated from the years before.
No, that is really interesting, especially because at least on some of the local impacts, there was such a big, at least early on, you know, the air quality impacts. We've seen interesting data out of Arizona and Utah, especially, showing just how, you know, getting people off the road for a month made such a huge difference.
Remember Beijing, you know, when Beijing was shut down initially,
the Olympics.
Wow, you know, we thought this is a great new world. This is where we're aiming for. This is where we're heading for. And so, yeah, it's sobering. Anyway, not relevant.
Yeah, I have a retired neighbor who I guess obsesses over her solar panel generation, and she says that during the shutdown in COVID, she noticed her panels were generating more than usual because there was less particulates in the air, which I thought was fascinating, but also she's sort of crazy.
Well, I do a similar thing. Well, at first, I'm also crazy. I've had my solar panels for 14 years. And I noticed during the smoke, you know, I could see a reduction, of course, from smoke. That was very noticeable. And then also, since I've had them for 14 years, I can just see their efficiency has declined by about 10, 15%. And that's sad. And I've asked, well, what do I do about that? And so, well, I had a guy come out and says, namaste. Well, we can just rip them off and put some new ones on there. And, you know, $10,000, $15,000 later, you're good to go. And I said, well, what do you do with the old ones? He says, oh, we'll just throw them somewhere. Yeah. They don't recycle the rare earth elements. They don't know what to do with them.
I know there's been some talk of moving, you know, shipping them to other countries and stuff, but it's not a good answer either. Anyway, that's getting off topic.
I think some of it's just because the carbon cycle, like the amount of CO2 that moves through it on an annual basis is really big compared to the total human output, right, of 1 year. So, and Mauna Loa is, you know, sort of averaging across all those at such a high level that, like, you know, the 30 or so human gigatons of emissions isn't really, you don't see it much in that like 700, 800 that flows through the natural cycle just for 1 year. You know what I'm saying? In 1 year, it's not a big portion of what's moving through the carbon cycle. That's my guess.
Yeah. Well, so back to the topic of which themes to emphasize with council. It seems like there's no dispute around air quality being one, and that energy systems seems like another. I'm not sure I've heard whether or not folks want to emphasize. And then.
Yeah, I mean, I still like the urban. I mean, I still think the urban heat piece personally is important, and I agree that I think that's an area that we've identified where, you know, the city hasn't really done anything or very little in that area, and that to the extent we can keep reminding council and trying to push that forward, but especially as it relates to, I mean, you know, this summer was brutally hot, and I think it was, you know, it's timely that the city should be thinking about this issue, I think. So I think that's one we would want to keep.
Susan, did you have a hand up?
Yeah, I'm looking at the idea bank and thinking about my obsession with the fact that we're in a climate emergency and feel like it. And I wonder, as I look at these ideas, some of them are causes of climate change, and some of them are effects of climate change that we need to do something about. And some of them are things that we could do to make climate change better. For instance, energy system change is a cause. Soils and sequestration is something we can do about it. air quality is in effect, and here's what we recommend. So it might be a way of organizing our report to council around climate emergency, and here are the key cause and what we think we should address, and effects and what we think we should address, and other things we can do, and how we would go about doing that and monitoring it.
Susan, this is Marty. Just a real quick comment. I don't disagree with you used the word climate emergency. But if you want to take the example of the doomsday clock as to what the priorities for those to think about these things 24/7 while we're sleeping and they're imagining the worst things happening in the world, they move the second hand on the doomsday clock a little bit forward, closer to midnight. And what is it that's been moving that clock? It actually hasn't been the climate emergency. I mean, what's been moving that clock is the environmental concern about a nuclear disaster. And I know the climate, I mean, I'm a climate scientist, so I'm all onto this too. But I think we also have to be cognizant of there being many emergencies that are environmental and that are destructive, for which some of which are out of our control entirely. And maybe, what am I trying to say here? Obviously, we're not going to make any recommendations to council about the nuclear emergency, but that is a threat is larger than the threat from climate, at least in the near term, the next several decades. So when we talk climate emergency, I guess we need to think about, what is it that could be done immediately related to that is concrete and meaningful.
Yeah, and to me, all the things I see on this idea bank are concrete and meaningful with regard to that.
Well, and part of when you made the useful comment, Susan, about differentiating causes and effects, I think one of the things that's clearly changing in climate action broadly is that, up till maybe 15, 16, we had the luxury of only focusing on mitigation primarily. And now we realize we have to focus on preparing for climate change and how we're going to deal with that at the same time. And what are the actions that we can take that optimize they sort of intersect both reducing emissions or stabilizing climate, but also preparing us for the inevitable climate change that's coming.
And I think we talked a lot about it in the past too, not just the temporal aspect, but also the local aspect. Like we have, the urban heat island, like we can all feel that locally and we can address that in a very local manner. Like there aren't too many.
And the wildfires.
Yeah. So like, it's like how far does our influence as a board go? Like we can really make a change that people within Boulder could feel regarding the urban heat island, where it's harder for us, I think, to, really truly, and like the soil sequestration one can be similar if we start thinking about local agriculture and bringing it full circle. But if we're just talking about like, reducing CO2 emissions, like we can do it locally, but it also might not feel it, right? You know what I'm saying? I guess there's like nice to do something maybe for the people, or something that's very, you can feel within the city. I don't know, that's my perspective.
No, especially in a resource constrained context in which we're going to increasingly have to choose between sort of abstract save the world things that reduce carbon broadly versus how we're going to prepare ourselves for some really significant local impacts.
Right.
Like particulate monitoring.
The use of the word climate emergency, I'm going to come back to that for a second. Would we do better in terms of actions if we called it environmental emergency? It gives it a bit of a broader umbrella. The word emergency would imply that we're calling for fairly immediate action. And there's various things that perhaps, I think the fire threat probably is an emergency that does require a really immediate action on the part of the city for planning and protecting the city from our proximity to the landscape just west of here. Some of it is related to climate, but other parts are related to the fact that we've moved homes into that area. We have more triggers that start fires, and we may not have the resources. We're not going in and we don't have enough burn naturally because we keep managing the forest. I was reading some pieces in the summer about the foresters are saying that what's really hurting us is that we're just not allowing enough natural burns to occur. We stop all the fires because this has been our habit for the last half century. But no one is going to advocate let it burn when it burns, because now we've moved too many homes into areas that used to be burnable that now have to be defended.
Yeah, the
So-
urban wildfire interface is a dangerous place. You know?
It is a dangerous place, and you know, Boulder increasingly has more of its communities sitting in that interface, and we play in that zone more than we ever used to. There's more of us playing in that zone, and we trigger fires as a result, inadvertently, sometimes advertently, and so it's an environmental emergency. It may not be a climate emergency as much as it is an emergency of our habits and the way we tend to our space and the way we use our space. It's more complicated than just climate.
So I think
I agree with that, but our city council passed a climate emergency measure in July of 2019, so about a year ago. And we said, oh, we're all in a climate emergency. But then it doesn't feel like there's a plan to address the cause and effect and how we create a more regenerative system to help them to do that, right?
Yep.
And of all the boards in the city I can think of that would address that for them, it seems like that would be the Environmental Advisory Board.
Well, environment. So was there a breaking point? Has something happened that the EAB could document and say, we have crossed the Rubicon? Let's say the fires that occurred this past summer. I don't know if certainly if they swept into Boulder, we would say, oh, we've passed a breaking point. And then there'd be no question about immediate actions.
We had 2 months of smoky days in a row.
Yeah, okay. So
I think
What, you know, like,
yeah, so do we want to make the claim that this is a breaking point, that this is actually going to only get worse year over year as a result of X, Y, and Z? And then these are the actions that the city should be contemplating. That's fine.
Can I just remind everyone that the city of Boulder, I mean, in Brett's group, puts together a climate action plan regularly and that addresses the climate emergency. I mean, is that not right, Brett?
well,
Is
I
that
think
not what your plan does?
we came to council last summer and we said, we have a plan, but it's no longer sufficient to the scale of the problem. And so that's where we initiated a process to work with the community to come up with a more ambitious plan. And then that process was kind of obviously disrupted by the current crises.
So that's in progress still.
It's still in progress, and we're still going to have to figure out how to create a plan for going forward without the communities being as involved as we had originally anticipated them being. So, but back to and I think Marty, you're making.
Sorry, but also Susan, I mean, EAB we're allowed to participate to that extent. You know, we are part of Brett's group and helping advise his group and how they're moving forward with their action plan, right?
Yeah, and just one sort of parenthetical comment, Susan, which is that municipalization has absorbed a significant portion of Boulder's climate action capabilities for the past 10 years. And so part of the question now that's to some extent been addressed by what just happened yesterday is that to some extent now that piece of work is going to continue to proceed with a more distinct and separate implementation process. And we're going to, I think, more clearly differentiate the rest of climate initiatives to say, now what should it be focusing on? So back to this question, and Marty, I think you're raising a really interesting point. Is it an environmental emergency or a climate emergency? But we still come back to the same basic question that is to you right now to say to council, here's what we think the most important things around environment, which includes climate, are that you as council should be focusing on.
And hence our talk about moving to higher priority, the air quality concern.
Yeah. So Heidi, can you make me a host so I can share my screen? Or Brett?
Yeah. Oops, I can't for some reason. Heidi, I think you're going to have to.
Thanks. Oh, look at all these buttons I have now. I don't know. I was going to figure we should try to get something concrete. Can you guys see my screen?
Yep. very small
So,
font, make it bigger.
Yeah, I can blow it up maybe if I can figure out how to use Google Drive.
There's a little 100% button over there.
There we go. Here, I can put it on a smaller now. This is fine. Okay, so I don't know if we want to stick to this. What made your board happy? What made your board sad?
I've never seen this type of question from council before, by the way.
But that's what we got. You know, I think we could combine them into, you know, a paragraph that just talks about the big issues that came before EAB this year, which was certainly, you know, we didn't meet for a number of months, so we've sort of had a truncated year. But I would say, you know, seems like prairie dogs and air quality are the things we've spent
Well, it was
majority of our time
satisfying.
of. I guess there was some work on Heat Island and resiliency, like early in the
Yeah,
year.
there was a lot of stuff around Chautauqua and
Mhm.
yeah.
I mean, what made me happy as being part of the board, aside from working with you great people here, was that the city kind of really engaged with us around the prairie dog issue. We ended up writing, you know, they solicited, they were interested in our opinion. They were awaiting a draft recommendation from us. It had an effect, and that we got feedback. I mean, council, that we really appreciated that you guys went ahead and put your thoughts to this problem and got back to us. I really appreciated that. And that made me happy to be part of this board, among other reasons, the engagement and the feedback we got around the prairie dog.
Yeah. I think that's reasonable. So I don't know if we want to do this more as a summary. I don't know if there's anything that made us sad. So they spelled prairie.
Justin, I'm sorry to interrupt. This is Heidi. I just pulled up the minutes from last year.
Mhm.
And Brett, you know, I'm kind of taking over from Delaney, so I haven't seen the specific instructions from council. But in addition to the questions you have, Justin, the questions that were asked last year
Mhm.
were, what are the top 3 priorities for the 2021 to 2022 work plan? Why don't I'll put this in the chat so you can see the questions that were asked last year.
Okay, and yeah, it seems like it might be, maybe it's a little different this year.
Yeah, I'm not sure. But I'll put in the chat the questions that were posed last year. I don't know if that's helpful or not.
I think it is helpful. I mean, I almost wish I could say this sort of off the record, but I feel like I don't quite understand these questions that they've asked you to answer in terms of how that gives them feedback from you about what issues you think they should be paying most attention to. And I would sort of encourage you to consider just telling them that one way or the other, because that's part of the role that you are chartered to have.
Yeah, so maybe it's worth, I mean, I think we could collapse these 2 bullets into one about just, you know, a paragraph summarizing the key issues over this past year.
But you're talking about you're writing down positive things, and I don't know that anything made us sad. Do we have anything that made us sad?
Yeah, I mean, as a board,
Yeah.
there's been a lot of crap in 2020. That's
Yeah, I mean, but,
We don't get free dinner anymore. That's kind of a bummer.
that did make me sad.
what was that, Mike? I didn't hear that.
We don't get free dinner.
We have to bring our own dinner to meetings.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we can say it makes me sad to say that the global carbon concentration in the atmosphere went up 3 parts per million.
There you go.
As an EAB, that should make us all sad.
Made me sad that we couldn't meet for 4 or 5 months because of COVID. But yeah, I mean, I don't think we need to frame it like that if we don't want to.
So
that
is the work that we're doing towards air quality right now part of last year or this year? I mean, is that, yeah.
Well, I think you have pushed the city in some really great areas in this year, and
Yeah,
I
so it
feel like
counts.
we should
Okay.
highlight that and
Yeah,
then talk about how we can build on it in the next year.
sure.
That would be
Really
my suggestion.
positive cohesion between City of Boulder and Boulder County to put together a smoke management plant to protect our population against particulate emissions.
Yeah, and I mean, I think we had that great call. It sounds like, I mean, we had Denver and Fort Collins. I believe Fort Collins was there. Maybe it was just Denver and Longmont.
It was
Boulder
Denver
County.
and Longmont. Yeah, Fort Collins couldn't make it, but I presented some of the stuff from Fort Collins in my presentation.
Yeah, so I mean, I think, EAB brought those folks together early in the year before this became so timely, and it's
I guess
great that
that's
you're
right.
now
Yeah.
working with them.
It might even be worth, sorry, to call out that, and I think we've talked about this somewhat with the board, that in the past, it was more customary for boards to simply be responsive than to be proactive, and that the board has been encouraged to be a bit more proactive, and that you've really been able to be more engaged, to have more influence because of that. And I think it might be useful for the council to be aware of that.
Yeah, it sort of ties into Marty's point. Well, maybe it doesn't.
I think both of them, though. I mean, some of us have gotten more engaged, with topics that interest us. And I mean, Mike has participated in the Green Whites project specifically, and
Yeah, that's been great. I've enjoyed that.
I guess if I were to sort of put a critique, let's not call it sad, maybe unhappy is closer to the mark. But and this isn't meant to be critical of the climate action plan, but I'm a little bit unhappy about the climate action plan because I don't quite understand what actions are happening aside from plans being discussed and little rally occurring. When we went in October of last year, that was great. But I still don't get a sense as to what actions have actually followed from the climate action plan. Maybe this is an open question for the board and for Brett.
I think that's totally fair. I think I hear Susan asking of sort of variation on that question too. I don't need to.
Yeah, I agree with Susan's statement also. I'm a little bit unhappy is a stronger word than I would use, of course, but I'm a little bit puzzled as to knowing more, especially being on EAB, as to what actions are actually transpiring as related to that plan.
It is, I think I've said this before, it is one of the unfortunate consequences of the significant degree to which Boulder's climate action plan has been so enmeshed in the Muni process, and that to the extent the Muni process has been in limbo for so long, and particularly over this last year, it has put a lot of our work, and especially at least our available staff resources, in limbo. So I think the question you're asking is one that you should press, frankly.
so I think for looking forward to 2021, that should be one of our items where we spend more time in dealing with the climate action plan.
Yeah, I'm for that.
Yeah, and that sort of, so then I guess there's, do people want to? So I guess, we talked about, do people want to frame this as responding to climate change, or is it more broad than that.
Well, I mean, is this a place where we can just say, we look forward to continuing to work on issues we began XX, you know what I mean? And just list them out and say like, I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. Forget what else did we talk about? Urban
Heat island, yeah, and the soil and sequestration.
And yeah, climate action plans.
I can't think of the word franchise without thinking of fast food. Like every time I see it, I'm like.
Would you like
No.
fries for that franchise agreement?
Yeah.
Yep. All right, we have 9 minutes, so I know my goal as chair is always to have us end on time. So
there are, how many of us? There are 5 of us?
5 of us, this is still real high level.
Really? Yes, but each of us take one of those topics and expand on it.
Yeah. So this is what, continuing work on areas of priority. for EAB and
Justin, I think you've done a brilliant job of framing up the questions as they were asked of you and then finding a way to include this.
and then doing whatever I wanted.
Power of the pen.
Yeah, so yeah, I guess it's worth maybe splitting up writing and looking at a calendar and thinking how we can trying to set some deadlines. And Heidi, I tried to put this in the old Google Drive for EAB and it said it was in Delaney's trash. So I'm just doing this in my personal account right now. So somebody on the city might need to create a new Google Drive.
Right, I actually sent my document from my personal drive too.
Heidi, I think we did do that. I think maybe Emily has already set that up.
Okay, yeah, I just looked at last year's letter and clicked on a link from that.
Yeah, it's done.
Okay, so does anyone have any preferences on whether they want to look backwards or forwards?
I would like to do the air quality write-up.
Both of them?
I would be most interested in the Excel franchise agreement.
All right.
I'm happy to do anything with soils and urban heat island. Those were the two that I.
That's with Mike. Susan. Mike.
Why don't you put me down climate action plan to?
Yeah, you want that, Marty? I was gonna say I could also do that.
Yeah, that's fine. Put both down on there. It's fine.
Yeah, or I can take. I can take if you want to take a first shot at climate action plan, that's fine, and I can try to write up the 2021.
Oh, Mike just got 2.
Yeah, Mike got 2.
It's fine.
So I think my goal, let's maybe look at last year's. I like how the forward-looking stuff is like a paragraph, personally.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're pretty
So
short.
I don't, I guess I don't want to limit people if there's stuff to talk about, but my input would be, let's try to keep it short.
Don't bring up 3 different topics, Miriam. Goodness.
Yeah, Miriam, your air quality thing has sub-bullets. But I think it's also because you had the most to talk about, and that's why we've made the most progress related to air quality. So, there's a balance there.
Yeah.
All right. So does this make sense? And Miriam, I can take this whole, I think I can write up I don't know. based on this conversation, I can take a first shot at this. If you
Yeah,
wanna
why don't you,
do the
and then I'll just look at it, yeah.
forward-looking piece. So is our next meeting on the 2nd or the 9th?
Second.
2nd. So do people think they could have this? So this is what, the week of Thanksgiving?
Excuse me.
I mean, if we could get things done by the 30th. Is that doable for everybody?
Sure.
Yeah.
Cool. And then we can talk about the first draft at our next meeting and figure out how to get it finalized.
Yeah, and Heidi, I hate to put this on you, but Delaney was awesome about giving us reminders and here's what you need to do. Not sure if that's your role here or if we need to do it to ourselves now.
Heidi is carrying probably three people's.
Three people's loads, yeah. Okay.
I'm happy to send out a reminder.
Okay.
What I will do is I will also send a link with the updated Google Drive folder.
Okay, yeah, I can throw it in there and then email a link around to folks.
And then, I mean, if you just give us dates in that email, that would, or, you know, when we have stuff due, that would be awesome. Thank you.
Sure.
All right, well, seems like we got a plan forward.
Justin, I just wanted to say I can do this last topic on the agenda really quickly.
Okay,
I just wanted to note that it sort of snuck up on me because we've had so much transition in this board that a couple of our board members' terms are ending in March of this year. And Marty, that includes you and Justin. But it's important to note that board members, existing board members can apply again. And I would sure like to invite you both to consider doing so. Just to make sure that you know that council has already started discussing starting up that process again. And so for you to give some consideration to whether that's something you're interested in.
And I'm just going to give you a little input on that. I applied for a second round, and when Karen told me about, you know, how the process went, she was like, "Oh, you should be a shoo-in, no problem." But then I had to go in and do the full interview and everything, and I was totally unprepared. Like, so they do ask you to do everything again.
Yeah. Yeah.
Was it a 2-year position? I guess I had forgotten the term.
Yeah, so both you and Justin's, yours was, Marty, yours was you were in May of 19 and you go to March of 21. I think you might have been stepping in for a person who, I can't remember now who it was that left.
I see.
Jason?
Was it Jason? Yeah,
I think
Might have
so.
been.
I think it was, yeah.
So, yeah, so please, if you're interested though, please, and Heidi, have you heard anything about that process yet?
I have not seen any emails.
Okay.
But I think what we determined is the terms expire end of March.
Yeah, yeah. So maybe Heidi, I'll put on my follow-ups, but that we get whatever information we can out to Marty and Justin about the process for the next round.
Well, I'd like to think I'm a free agent and that there'll be a bidding war and salary increase at the end of the golden.
Yeah, I know, it's true. That's funny. I was just watching I sort of avoided it, but because I'm a little bedridden, I was watching the Michael Jordan special, and there's this whole segment about Scottie Pippen and how he was kind of underrated, underserved in his initial contract. So Marty, you have every right to get your agent in this right away.
Yeah, I'll get my agent talking to you guys.
Right.
Be like Mookie Betts. It'd be good.
All right, how do I put this? All right, so I guess it's 8 o'clock. See if I can figure out how to get this letter into the share drive link that Heidi sent. But if there's nothing else, maybe let's adjourn, and it'd be great if everybody could do their write-ups timely so we can have something to talk about next time.
Sounds good. Thank you, Justin.
Great, thanks everyone, and see you in a month.
Thanks
Feel
all.
better, Brett.
All right,
Bye,
thanks,
everybody.
everybody.
Thanks, Heidi.
Oh, thanks, everyone. Oh, Marty,
Hi.
can you do me a favor? For some reason, you're the host.
Oh, I wonder how I'm the host.
I don't know how that happened. But
How did that happen?
I'm not sure.
I can't even, I'm such a bad host, I can't even get myself logged off.
And maybe if you leave, I become the host. But and the little box that is me, where the little 3 dots are, if you could make me the host, I would greatly appreciate that.
I don't even know where I do that. And I don't under, I can't possibly be the host. Well, let's see here, assign new host. It must just be because I'm the last person that is logging
It
off.
might be, and if you log off, I'll probably get access back.
That's what I'm thinking. So I'm looking here. I don't understand why this isn't working. I hit end meeting for all, or leave meetings. Hit leave meeting, assign and